They say Alaska changes a man. I say it unmakes him. Welcome to Cascara National Preserve, a place where the wilderness doesn't just watch you, it knows you. My name is Ethan Calhoun, and I came here seeking solitude, a place to outrun my past. Instead, I was given 3 strange rules to stay alive. What's the most isolated place you've ever been? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to face the silence, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because out here, the land remembers, and it collects. The shift begins now. They say Alaska changes a man. After my time in the Cascara National Preserve, way out in the godforsaken armpit of the state, I know it does more than change you. It unmakes you, peels you back layer by layer, until there's nothing left but a name even you barely recognize. I took the ranger post chasing the ghost of a woman, and the echo of a scream I couldn't stop, figuring the biting cold and the endless silence might cauterize old wounds. The job came with a battered ATV, a satellite phone that mostly picked up static, and 3 rules scrawled on the back of a stained park map. Miles Henner, the senior ranger, with eyes like chips of glacial ice, just offered a thin smile when he handed it over. Said the last fella, who figured they were just folksy suggestions. Well, his name's not even on the Park Service roster anymore. Like he was never here at all. The Cascara Ranger Station was less a building, and more a collection of logs lashed together against the indifferent howl of the Alaskan wind. It stood on the edge of a vast, brooding forest that swallowed sound and light with equal appetite. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of something holding its breath, waiting. My transfer papers had called it an opportunity for solitary reflection. The graffiti scratched into the underside of my assigned bunk called it the Maw. Miles Henner met me on the frost-licked porch, a man as weathered and unreadable as the mountains that loomed over us. He was in his late 40s, lean and wiry, with a handshake like a bundle of dried leather. She's a harsh mistress, but she's got her compensations. His gaze swept over the wilderness, a flicker of something proprietary, almost reverent, in their depths. He showed me the ropes, the sputtering generator, the temperamental radio array, the cache of emergency supplies that looked like they hadn't been touched since the Klondike Gold Rush. Then, almost as an afterthought, he unfolded that old, creased map. The rules were handwritten in faded ink, the script precise and unnervingly steady. Document all wildlife sightings, but never photograph the white caribou. They photograph you back. Never follow bear tracks that lead uphill in perfect single file. Real bears don't walk like humans. When you realize the wolves have been following you for days, but their tracks show they're walking on 2 legs, you're not being followed by wolves anymore. I stared at them, a knot of unease tightening in my chest. This wasn't some hazing ritual. The look in Henner's eyes was too serious, too resigned. White caribou photograph you back? I asked, trying to keep the sarcasm from my voice. This land's old, Calhoun, Henner said, his gaze fixed on some distant, unseen point in the tree line. Got its own ways. Best to respect? He folded the map and handed it to me. Just stick to the protocols. Most folks do fine. His emphasis on most was subtle, but it landed like a stone. The only other soul at the station was Louis Romero, the radio operator. He was a cheerful younger man whose forced optimism felt jarring in the oppressive quiet. Hey there, Ranger Calhoun, he chirped, extending a hand. Don't let old man Henner spook you too much. Just keep your head down. Don't wander off the trails after dark, and try not to think about what makes those scratching sounds outside your window at 3 a.m. He winked, but his eyes darted nervously towards the darkened forest ladder. Unpacking my meager belongings into the cramped cold locker, my hand brushed against something metallic. It was an old Park Service issued digital camera, its casing scratched and dented. I switched it on. One file. Corrupted. It wouldn't open. Just flashed a thumbnail image. a blinding, overexposed white against a blur of dark green. The date stamp read 8/14/2017. The name on the locker's faded label was Ashton. Ashton. I'd seen that name on a list Miles had shown me of rangers who'd requested transfers to less demanding districts. The file name was simply, It Sees Me. My first patrols were a blur of biting wind, endless spruce, and the profound, almost crushing silence of Cascara. I logged everything meticulously. Moose, ptarmigan, a distant grizzly. The vastness of it should have been calming, a balm to the raw edges of my past. Instead, it felt watchful, like the forest itself was a single sentient entity, its myriad eyes tracking my every move. I was charting a new game trail near the Cascara River's frozen North Fork when it stepped from a thicket of snow-dusted willows. It was magnificent, a true ghost of the tundra, its fur the color of fresh snow, its antlers like intricate ice sculptures. But it was too perfect. Its movements were unnervingly fluid, its stillness absolute, and its eyes, they weren't the dull brown of a normal caribou. They were startling, intelligent, almost sapphire blue. Rule 1 screamed in my mind. Never photograph the white caribou. My hand, however, had already, almost by reflex, gone to the official park camera, slung over my shoulder. I raised it, peered through the viewfinder, my finger hovering over the shutter. The caribou stood perfectly still, not 20 yards away, staring directly at me, those unnatural blue eyes boring into mine. I hesitated, a profound sense of wrongness washing over me, and slowly lowered the camera. I didn't take the shot. The caribou held my gaze for another long moment. Then, with a flick of its ears, it turned and melted into the dense brush, not with the usual crashing and snapping of branches, but with an impossible liquid silence. It was simply gone. Later that evening, back at the station, the unease lingered. I was transferring my patrol logs to the main computer. Louis was off shift. Miles was somewhere out on his own rounds. The station felt unnervingly empty. Idly, I picked up my personal smartphone, strictly against regulations for documenting park matters, but habit was a hard thing to break. I scrolled through my recent photos, mostly mundane shots of the landscape, and then I saw it. A new photo, one I hadn't taken. It was a perfectly focused, high-resolution image of me, taken from about 20 yards away, from a slightly low angle, the caribou's perspective. I was staring directly at the camera, my face etched with surprise, the park-issue camera still halfway raised in my hand. The date and timestamp were from that afternoon, from the exact moment I'd encountered the white caribou. My blood ran cold. It hadn't just seen me. It had recorded me. A few days later, I ran into Janessa Quinn. She was a researcher, a tough, no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a blunt way of speaking, out checking a string of weather sensors near a place called Weeping Widow Pass. She was all business, initially dismissive of my attempts at small talk. Then I mentioned the remoteness, feeling of the place. My brother, David, came up here hiking 3 years ago, she said, her voice suddenly tight, her gaze fixed on the distant, snow-capped peaks. He was an experienced outdoorsman. Zenith garbled sat phone message about something in the trees, watching him. Then nothing. They never found a trace. She kicked at a loose stone. Park Service called it misadventure. I call it bullshit. There was a raw, personal grief in her voice that resonated with my own hidden pains. As she turned to leave, she paused. If you see anything unusual, even if it sounds crazy. She didn't finish, just gave me a hard, searching look. At night, Louis was on the radio, humming. It was a strange, archaic-sounding tune. A mournful, repetitive, a few bars into it. I recognized it, or thought I did. A snatch of a melody from a half-forgotten folk ballad. about a vengeful ice spirit my grandmother used to sing. A song I hadn't heard in 20 years. Luis, I asked, where'd you learn that song? He stopped humming abruptly, a look of genuine confusion on his face. Song? What song, Ethan? I wasn't singing anything. He shook his head, a nervous tremor in his hand as he adjusted his headset. Must be the static. This place, it plays tricks on your ears. The cascara started to seep under my skin. I began finding things on my patrols. Small, unsettling cairns of stones, stacked in impossible formations. Bundles of raven feathers tied with sinew hanging from low branches. Symbols I didn't recognize carved into the bark of ancient trees. When I mentioned them to Miles, he'd just shrug, his eyes unreadable. Old native boundary markers, or hikers getting creative. Means nothing, Calhoun. Stick to your route. His dismissals felt too quick, too practiced. The bear tracks appeared after the first heavy snowfall of the late autumn. I found them near Grizzly Creek, a place aptly named usually. But these were wrong. They were huge, undeniably bare. But they led directly uphill, up a steep, scree-covered slope that no sane bear would attempt unless pursued by demons. And they were in a perfect, unwavering single-file line. Each massive print, placed with an almost delicate human-like precision, as if the creature were walking on its hind legs, carefully, deliberately. Rule 2. Real bears don't walk like humans. A strange lethargy, a dreamlike compulsion settled over me. The tracks beckoned, pulling me towards the fog-shrouded, treacherous ridge above. Just a look, a voice whispered in my mind. See where they go? I took a step, then another, the snow crunching under my boots. The silence was absolute, save for the frantic thumping of my own heart. It was only when I felt the icy kiss of the wind whipping over the ridge, carrying with it a faint, musky, carrion scent that was too fresh, too wrong, that I managed to break the spell. I stumbled back, a cold sweat prickling my skin, the image of those unnaturally precise tracks burning in my mind. It was a few days later that Harper Lynn, a wildlife biologist stationed at a research outpost about 50 miles east, made a crackling, static-laced call over the radio. Her voice was strained, verging on hysterical. She'd been sorting through old archived material from previous Cascara research projects. Ethan, you there? It's Harper. You won't believe this. Static nearly swallowed her words. I found a photo, a group shot, Cascara Rangers, by the old Weir. Dated August 1992. Okay, I said, though a knot of dread was already tightening in my stomach. But Ethan, I was born in October 1992. I've never been to Cascara before this year. The line crackled violently, then went dead. Luis, looking pale, said the signal was lost. Maybe an atmospheric disturbance. The weight of unspoken horrors pressed down. That evening I was going through some old park supply requisitions in the main office, trying to distract myself. Tucked between 2 pages of an order form for snowshoes from 1985 was a small folded piece of paper. It was a child's drawing, pencil on cheap, lined notebook paper. A crude depiction of a stick figure, me in my ranger hat, standing by a river. The style was simple, unsophisticated, the kind of drawing I myself had made countless times as a boy. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was one of my childhood drawings, one I distinctively remembered losing during a family camping trip in Montana when I was 8 years old. Its edges were singed, as if it had been held too close to a flame. The feeling of being watched became a constant, suffocating presence. It wasn't just the woods anymore. It was in the station, in my cramped bunk, in the flickering shadows cast by the generator-powered lights. I'd catch glimpses of movement at the periphery of my vision. Something too tall, too pale, too quick to be an animal. that would vanish when I turned to look. The silence of Cascara became a canvas upon which my anxieties painted vivid, terrifying tableaus. Miles Henner grew more distant, his pronouncements more cryptic. He seemed to know where I'd been on patrol without my telling him, commenting on things I had seen but hadn't logged. He'd suggest routes that led me deeper into unsettling territory, or subtly steer me away from areas where I'd found the strange totems. His calm, mentor-like facade was beginning to fray at the edges, revealing glimpses of something colder, more calculating beneath. Janessa Quinn sought me out. Her usual brusque professionalism was gone, replaced by a raw, shaken fear. The caribou. Ethan, she said, her voice trembling. The white one. I saw it again, near the Weeping Widow Glacier. It was just staring at me. And then, its eyes. They weren't animal eyes. They were human, blue, like you said, but they looked right through me. Like it knew about David. She was close to tears, and then it blinked. Slowly, like a man, and vanished. I'm not crazy, Ethan. That thing isn't natural. Her terror was a chilling validation of my own mounting dread. The rules weren't folklore. They were dire warnings. The wolf tracks started appearing a few days later. Not just a pair, but many. They shadowed my patrols. Always just out of sight, their presence a constant, unnerving pressure at the edge of my senses. I logged them, noting their persistence, their uncanny ability to parallel my route without ever revealing themselves. Miles, when I showed him my log, just nodded slowly. Wolves are smart, Calhoun. Curious. They're just checking out the new blood in their territory. But there was no conviction in his voice. Then came the day of reckoning. I was deep in the backcountry, tracking a reported injured moose near the base of Shadow Peak, an area notorious for sudden fogs and disorienting terrain. The wolf tracks were there, as always, flanking me. I'd grown almost accustomed to their unseen presence. But then I came to a patch of soft, damp earth by a frozen creek bed, and the prints were startlingly clear. My breath caught in my throat. I knelt, my heart hammering. The front prints were undeniably wolf, large and powerful. But the rear prints, as I stared, a wave of icy horror washed over me. They weren't wolf prints. They were elongated, narrower, with a distinct heel impression, and what looked horrifyingly like 5 clawed toe marks. The stride was wrong, too. Too long, too balanced. As if whatever made them was walking upright, on 2 legs. Rule 3. When you realize the wolves have been following you for days, but their tracks show they're walking on 2 legs, you're not being followed by wolves anymore. As the terrible realization sank in, a low growl, deeper and more resonant than any wolf I'd ever heard, rumbled from the dense spruce just ahead. It was a sound that vibrated in my bones, a primal warning. It was followed, an instant later, by a soft, guttural chuckle. A chuckle that, despite the distortion, sounded chillingly, impossibly, like Miles Henner. My radio crackled to life. It was Lewis, his voice thin and frantic. Ethan, is that you? I have a message. From Henner, I think. But I can't remember your call sign, Ranger. I can't remember who I'm talking to. His voice dissolved into a choked sob of confusion and static. The Cascara was not just watching. It was actively unmaking us. One memory, one identity, at a time. And the things that wore the shapes of wolves were closing in. The chuckle, that distorted echo of Miles Henner's voice, died away, replaced by a silence so profound it was a physical pressure. The air grew bitingly cold. The scent of pine and damp earth suddenly overlaid with a faint metallic tang, like old blood and something else. A dry, dusty scent, like decaying parchment or memories left too long in a forgotten attic. My hand instinctively went to the flare gun on my belt. A pathetic defense against whatever was lurking in those suffocatingly dense trees. Ethan. The voice was a whisper, seeming to come from all around me, from the wind sighing through the spruce, from the frozen earth beneath my boots. It was a chorus of voices, male and female, young and old, all speaking my name in a sibilant, sorrowful harmony. And woven through it, a single, clearer, childish voice, cold and beckoning. Then they emerged, not wolves, not anymore. 3 figures stepped from the tree line, moving with an unnatural, fluid grace that was both predatory and chillingly human. They were tall, gaunt, their forms swathed in what looked like tattered pale hides that blended seamlessly with the snow-dusted landscape. Their limbs were too long, their movements a grotesque parody of a human gait. Yet they walked upright on those horrifying, elongated, clawed feet. Their heads were wolf-like, yes, with muzzles full of needle-sharp teeth. But their eyes glowed with that same pale, intelligent, sapphire blue light I'd seen in the White Caribou. The White Watcher, Uruk, in its hunting pack form. Impressive, aren't they, Calhoun? Miles Henner stepped out from behind the largest of the bipedal wolf things, as calmly as if he were leading a nature walk. He held a strange, gnarled wooden staff, carved with the same unsettling spiral symbols I'd seen on the totems in the woods. There was no pretense left, no mentorly warmth. His eyes held only a cold, reptilian satisfaction. Miles. What the hell are these things? I stammered, my voice a dry rasp, my gaze darting between him and the 3 unblinking blue-eyed horrors, the true caretakers of Cascara. Henner said, a hint of reverence in his tone. The old ones, Uruk, as the first people called it. The White Watcher, it's been here since the ice receded. And my people, my community, we've had an understanding with it for generations. He gestured with his staff towards the wolf things. They grant us longevity, our resilience against this harsh land. They keep Cascara pure, untainted. And in return, we ensure it is fet, the word caught in my throat. Hikers, the ones who go missing. Henna's thin lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The land provides. Sometimes it's those who stray too far. Sometimes it's those who don't respect the traditions. He looked pointedly at me. The rules, Calhoun, they aren't for your survival. They're part of the ritual. To season the offering. To make the hunt more resonant for Uruk. You've been setting us up, I realized, the pieces falling into place with horrifying clarity. Ashton. The others. Ashton, the others. The corrupted camera file. The drawings. Louis' memory. Uruk feeds on more than flesh, Calhoun, Henner said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It savors memory, identity. It unravels a person, erases them from the tapestry of time, makes them as if they never were. A truly complete offering. He took a step closer, the wolf things flanking him like monstrous sentinels. And you, Ethan, with all your delicious guilt, your buried trauma, you will be my final, most potent gift before I fully embrace the Watcher's blessing. My retirement, you could say. Suddenly, a voice, sharp and furious, cut through the tense silence. Henner, you bastard! Janessa Quinn burst from the tree line to my left, a heavy-duty ice axe clutched in her hands, her face a mask of rage and grief. She must have followed my radio silence, or perhaps tracked the unnatural stillness that had fallen over this part of the preserve. My brother, David, she screamed, advancing on Henner. You fed him to this thing, didn't you? Henna merely sighed, a look of mild annoyance on his face. He was uncooperative, broke several protocols. Uruk found his memories particularly flavorful. As Janessa lunged, one of the wolf things moved with blinding speed, intercepting her, its claws raking across her arm, drawing blood. She cried out, stumbling back, and then the air shimmered. Between two ancient pines, a figure began to coalesce, indistinct at first, then resolving into the ghostly, translucent form of Harper Lynn. But not the Harper I knew. This one was younger, her eyes wide with a timeless confusion. Her Kaskara Ranger uniform faded and tattered, as if she were an echo from a forgotten photograph. It lies, Harper's ghostly voice whispered, her form flickering like a dying flame. The pact. It consumes all time. She reached a spectral hand towards me. Then her image dissolved, as if a switch had been thrown. Uruk was playing with us using its gallery of consumed identities. The attack was swift, brutal. The wolf things moved with terrifying coordination, their blue eyes fixed on us with an unblinking, predatory focus. Miles directed them with subtle gestures of his staff, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of terror. The environment itself seemed to conspire against us. A sudden, disorienting whiteout squall swept down from the peaks, reducing visibility to near zero. Familiar landmarks vanished in the swirling snow. I could hear Janessa's pained cries, the guttural snarls of the wolf things, Miles' low, encouraging murmurs to his pets. I fired a flare. It arced into the white chaos, its crimson light momentarily illuminating the monstrous, shifting forms. For an instant, I saw the white caribou, standing on a nearby ridge, its sapphire eyes burning through the blizzard, watching, judging the rules. They were a trap. But what if one could be turned? Never photograph the white caribou. They photograph you back. What if the photographing back was more than just an image? What if it was a direct conduit, a focus point of Uruk's attention? I scrabbled for the official park camera, my fingers numb with cold and fear. Miles was closing in, his staff raised, his face alight with a fanatic's zeal. One of the wolf things lunged at Janessa, who was down, trying to staunch the bleeding from her arm, ignoring the swirling snow, the disorienting whispers that now included voices from my own past. The woman I'd lost, the screams from that disastrous rescue. I raised the camera, aimed it blindly towards where I'd last seen the caribou on the ridge, and pressed the shutter. The flash was blinding, even in the blizzard. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then a sound tore through the squall. A high-pitched, unearthly shriek that wasn't a wolf, wasn't human, wasn't anything natural. It was a sound of pure, concentrated agony and rage. The white caribou, its form flickering, distorting, its blue eyes burning with an intense, almost nuclear light, was suddenly there, not on the ridge, but towering over Miles Henner. Miles screamed, a sound of pure, abject terror, shielding his face as the caribou's gaze, its full, undivided attention, now focused entirely on him. The wolf things recoiled, whining, their blue eyes dimming. The pact, it seemed, had its own set of unspoken clauses. Uruk did not like its primary form being directly recorded. "Janessa, run!" I yelled, grabbing her uninjured arm, hauling her to her feet. We plunged into the blinding snow, leaving Miles Henner to face the undivided, furious attention of the White Watcher he had served for so long. His screams and the unearthly shrieks of Uruk were quickly swallowed by the Alaskan wilderness and the relentless, indifferent storm. The blizzard raged around us, a disorienting white hell. Miles Henner's screams, interwoven with the unearthly shrieks of the White Watcher, faded behind us, swallowed by the howling wind and the vast, indifferent emptiness of Cascara. We stumbled blindly, relying on instinct and a desperate, shared will to survive. The image of Oruk in its furious caribou form burning in my mind. The camera, my desperate gambit, was gone, lost somewhere in the snow and chaos. Janessa was flagging, the cold and blood loss from her arm taking their toll. I half carried, half dragged her, following what I prayed was the downward slope of the terrain. Away from the cursed ridge, the swirling snow played tricks on our eyes, forming monstrous, shifting shapes in the periphery. The whispers hadn't entirely ceased. They were fainter now, more distant, like the receding tide of a nightmare. But they still plucked at the edges of our sanity, fragments of forgotten voices, echoes of Oruk's hunger. Hours seemed to pass. The blizzard eventually began to abate, the wind dying down to a mournful sigh, the snowfall thinning to reveal a landscape transformed, alien and treacherous under a bruised twilight sky. We were lost, exhausted, and freezing, but miraculously still moving. By some stroke of blind luck, or perhaps because Oruk's attention was still fixed on the traitorous Henner, we stumbled upon a dilapidated, half-collapsed trapper's cabin I vaguely remembered seeing on an old survey map, miles from any established trail. It offered meager shelter, but it was out of the wind. We huddled together for warmth, Janessa's teeth chattering, her face pale and drawn. I did my best to clean and bind her arm with strips torn from my undershirt. "Miles," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. "And that thing, did we?" "I don't know," I said, the truth a cold weight in my gut. "But we can't go back there. Not ever." The cabin had an old hand-crank emergency radio, coated in rust and grime. After what felt like an eternity of fiddling with frozen dials, I managed to get a crackle of static. I broadcast a distress call, my voice raw, repeating our estimated GPS coordinates. Though the signal was weak, constantly interrupted by strange, sighing interference, and faint, melodic clicks that sounded chillingly like Oruk's caribou form. Luis Romero's voice eventually came through, thin and reedy, almost unrecognizable. "Cascara, base. Who is this? State your call." His words were broken, disjointed. He sounded confused, lost. "Louis, it's Ethan, right?" "And Janessa Quinn. We need immediate evac. Hostile. Contact. Senior Ranger Henner compromised." There was a long pause, filled with static and those unnerving clicks. Then Luis, his voice flat, almost robotic. "Henner. Miles Henner. No ranger by that name. In Cascara. Database. Who is Miles Henner?" Another click, then a soft, childish giggle, quickly cut off. The line went dead. A new, colder dread settled over me. Oruk wasn't just killing, it was erasing. Henner, for all his years of service to the entity, was being unmade from reality. We were found the next day, spotted by a search and rescue helicopter, delirious and frostbitten, huddled in the ruins of the cabin. Of Miles Henner, there was no sign. The official search parties found nothing but undisturbed snow where we said he'd confronted us. The area around the ridge was deemed too unstable for a thorough ground search due to recent seismic activity. No mention of unearthly shrieks or colossal, enraged caribou. Luis Romero was airlifted out a few days later, suffering from what doctors called a severe dissociative fugue with profound amnesia. He couldn't remember his own name, let alone ours. He just hummed those old forgotten ranger songs, his eyes vacant. The Cascara station itself felt tainted, hollow. I found Miles Henner's personal locker. It was empty, completely impossibly empty, as if he'd never existed. His decades of service wiped clean from the station's very fabric. His name was gone from every roster, every shift schedule. Only a faint, lingering scent of dry parchment and old, sad memories remained. The official story was a masterpiece of bureaucratic obfuscation. Two civilians and a park ranger, caught in an unseasonable and severe blizzard, suffering from exposure, hypothermia, and trauma-induced hallucinations. Genesis injuries were attributed to a fall. My report on Miles Henner was filed away as the ramblings of a mind pushed beyond its limits. Cascara National Preserve was temporarily closed to the public, citing extreme weather conditions and the need for urgent wildlife population assessment and trail maintenance. Janessa and I went our separate ways, united by a horror no one else would ever comprehend, yet too scarred to find solace in each other's company for long. She threw herself into researching historical disappearances in remote Alaskan regions, looking for patterns, for any evidence of Uruk's wider influence, her brother's erasure a driving, tormenting force. I left the Park Service. I couldn't bear the silence of the wilderness anymore, or the way the wind through the trees sometimes sounded like whispers. I moved south, as far from Alaska as I could get, finding a job as a night security guard in a sprawling, soulless corporate park, a wilderness of concrete and glass, but one I hoped was free of ancient, hungry gods. But Cascara and Uruk had left their indelible mark. I'd catch myself staring at photographs, looking for discrepancies, for faces that shouldn't be there, or for familiar faces that were subtly wrong. The memory of Harper Lynn, a ghost from a future she never lived, haunted me. Was she erased completely now? Or did echoes of her still flicker at the edges of time? Sometimes I'd wake in a cold sweat, the phantom sensation of those sapphire blue eyes on me, the scent of old parchment filling my sterile apartment. I'd meticulously check online park rosters, old news articles, searching for Miles Henner's name, for any trace of his existence outside my fractured memory. There was nothing. It was as if the man had never drawn breath. One evening, about a year after Cascara, I was sorting through a box of my old military service records, things I hadn't looked at in years. Tucked inside my discharge papers was a faded black and white photograph of my old search and rescue unit, taken just before a particularly grueling mountain training exercise in Colorado. We were all there, young, tired, but grinning, and standing slightly apart from the group, almost in the shadow of a pine tree, was a figure I had never, ever noticed before. A tall, lean man with an unreadable expression, his features slightly blurred but unmistakably familiar. Miles Henner, or someone who looked so much like him it stopped my heart. He was looking directly at the camera, directly at me, and behind him, almost lost in the dappled sunlight and shadow, was the faint, ghostly outline of a pale caribou, its head slightly tilted, its eyes lost in the grain of the old photograph, but undeniably fixed on the scene. My hands trembled as I dropped the photo. Cascara wasn't just a place. Uruk wasn't just bound to that remote Alaskan valley. Its gaze was long. Its hunger for memory, for identity, was patient. And it remembered faces. It remembered mine. The rules of Cascara were a lie, a deception to mask a ritual older than human memory. But the real, unspoken rule, the one I now carried seared into my soul, was far simpler and far more terrifying. Once seen by the White Watcher, you are never truly unseen again. And somewhere, in some forgotten corner of the world, its pale eyes were always open, always waiting, always remembering, and eventually, always erasing.